I'm reminded of, the label spiritual but not religious. Like how many people would say like, oh, I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious. I would suggest, and I want to try to tease this out a little bit, but this is an example of the same kind of dichotomy and false dichotomy. And it reminds me of that scene in The Empire Strikes Back, which is the best of all the Star Wars films, objectively. It's not my opinion. I'm just stating facts here. But remember the scene where Luke is training, to be a Jedi, and he's with Yoda, the Jedi Master, in Dagobah, that bog, that swamp where he lives. And he's doing all this physical training and mental training, and there's a part where Yoda is trying to explain to Jesus to Luke what the Force is, because earlier in the first film, Obi-Wan Kenobi, the Jedi Master, says the Force is an energy field provided by all living things that surrounds us, penetrates us, binds the galaxy together. Well, there's a part where Yoda is instructing Luke, and he says, luminous beings are we, not this crude matter, right? And he's poking at him with his stick. Luminous beings are we, not this crude matter, right? It's that same sort of Gnostic, docetic mistrust of the flesh, right? That to say that we are bodily, to say that we are, incarnate, embodied, corporeal beings is some sort of detriment to true spirituality, which is why people like to say, well, I'm spiritual but not religious. And I want to try to use both an imperial orthodox and a heterodox exilic approach to this to show that idea is wrong and that dichotomy is false. Now, if somebody says, I'm spiritual but not religious, and if they mean, well, spiritual means vibrant and alive and dynamic, and religious just means cold and formal, well, all right, that's one thing. But I would suggest that that's not a good way of looking at it at all. What does the Christ event have to say about this, right? Because if we're going to say that, as Orthodox Christianity says, that Jesus is a divine person in whom are hypostatically united two natures, one human, the other divine. What does that do to this dichotomy between being luminous beings versus being beings of crude matter, material beings? What does that do to the distinction between heaven and nature, between flesh and spirit, between divinity and humanity? What does that do to the distinction between being religious and being spiritual? Right? Because I would suggest that dichotomy, to say that I'm not religious, I'm just spiritual, is ultimately a Christological error, because you're denying the hypostatic union of the two natures in the one person of Christ, right? The Incarnation ought to have destroyed the idea that physical matter is evil, right? That the flesh is evil. Even after his resurrection, according to the Gospels, the disciples think when Jesus appears to them after he had been crucified, they think they've seen a ghost. And he deliberately, I think it's in Luke, he deliberately goes out of his way to disabuse them of that idea. And he says, handle me and see, flesh and blood. He's eating, he says, give me some food, I'll eat it in front of you. Like, I'm doing things that flesh and blood does, right? A spirit does not have flesh and bones as you see I have. Even to Thomas, he's like, put your finger in the wounds and feel that it's really me, okay? And so, this idea that to be more spiritual is to be less religious, or to be more spiritual is to be less embodied, it may work well for some sort of New Age or perhaps Eastern religion, but if you're trying to be Christian, then it doesn't work, because you run into that problem, that pesky problem of Jesus, who is the Word made flesh. Right? If flesh is evil, then how can Jesus have been made flesh, right? I would argue that flesh and spirit are ultimately eschatological categories, having to do with this age and the age to come, at least according to Orthodox Christianity. But that's that's something I should have talked about in my Eschatology in Exile series that I did. The hypostatic union applies to all of this, right? The hypostatic union of the two natures in the one person of Christ. This, if this is true, and I don't mean true in the sense that like literally historically true, but I mean in the sense of like, if Christianity teaches this, which it does, and if we are identifying ourselves as Christians on some level, then this matters to us. It should matter, right? And so this idea that there's a hypostatic union of the two natures in the one person of Christ, that divinity and humanity they intersect in the person of Jesus, and if we are united with him on some level, then this idea that one is inferior to the other, it ought to be dispelled. We ought to be disabused of that idea altogether.